The antitrust subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing last week on Verizon Wireless's proposed plan to buy spectrum from a consortium of cable companies. As WebProNews previously reported, Verizon is hoping to buy spectrum from Comcast, Time Warner, Cox Communications, and Cox Communications for nearly $4 billion. The acquisition, however, has been highly debatable as numerous wireless carriers and public interest groups, including T-Mobile, Sprint, Nextel, Public Knowledge, and the National Consumer Law Center, have asked the FCC to block the deal. The controversy continued at last week's hearing, with witnesses on both sides arguing their claims. And our Brodsky of Public Knowledge is joining us now by way of Skype to tell us more about this hearing and its proceedings. Thanks for talking with us again, Art.
My pleasure, Abby.
Great. Well, for starters, how would you sum up this hearing?
This was a hearing that was called to explore some very, very serious issues. And just to add to a little bit of what you said in your introduction, the spectrum deal is only part of what's going on. It might not even be the most important part. In addition to and inextricably linked with the spectrum deal are these joint marketing agreements where Verizon Wireless will resell the cable high-speed internet product, and the cable people will resell the Verizon Wireless product. And those have all sorts of implications for competition, none of which are any good.
Right. I want to get into those specific issues. Addressing the spectrum issue, though, first, Verizon and Comcast both argued that the deal would help consumers, with Verizon specifically saying that it needed to address its spectrum crunch. So did it have any proof to back these claims, in your opinion?
It did not. And in fact, Verizon has been saying for months, and even said as recently as a few months ago during the whole debate over AT&T's takeover of T-Mobile, that it was fine for spectrum for the foreseeable future. And what you have in this deal is some really prime spectrum going to the largest carrier, which already has more than anybody else, to the detriment of who could be left in a competitive market. There was a lot of back and forth at the hearing about who the cable companies actually approached about selling the spectrum to, including T-Mobile or some smaller carriers, and none of that got resolved. So what looks like we have here is the bigger getting bigger and the smaller fading away because they're not able to have access to the raw material of wireless, which is spectrum.
Well, in terms of the joint marketing agreement, Public Knowledge and several other public interest groups and wireless carriers that oppose the deal had mentioned that this could really harm competition. So did Verizon and Comcast testify to anything that would reverse this opposition?
Not in the least. Not in the least. And what was very telling about this hearing is you had some very strong statements from the leaders of the committee. From the subcommittee chairman Cole, who was asking whether this is indeed a truce, whether this is rivals standing down, and from Senator Franken, who also probed the issue. I mean, so far, Comcast and its cable companies and Verizon have been very reticent to submit any information to the FCC for public consumption, which shows what actually is going on. What we do know is that there's absolutely no incentive for Verizon, the landline company, to build out or improve its data product because its wireless affiliate is going to be selling Comcast or Bright House or Time Warner. And in those little places where there's a fiber optic product, the FiOS, they stopped the build out there dead on. So even though that got a lot of attention at the hearing, the fact is that there are a lot of places, in fact, most places in Verizon service territory that don't have FiOS, and those people are going to have one choice, either very slow copper-based DSL, which is not much anymore, or the cable company.
Right, and some people have even speculated that it almost appears that Verizon is giving up on FiOS.
Well, they already gave up. I mean, they gave up months ago. They said we're going to build out to 18 million, past 18 million people. And I think they said in the hearing that they have about a 33% take rate. That's only 6 million. So a very, very small percentage of the country actually has FiOS. And they're not building it out anymore because they got slammed by Wall Street. So there's virtually no competition left in most of the areas of Verizon that aren't even going to get FiOS, much as left the ones where FiOS is deployed.
Well, in terms of the disputed joint operating entity, did Comcast and Verizon address the concerns that this raises?
Not at all. All they're trying to put it out is some little side research thing. And we are very concerned about that when you have the biggest wireless company, the whole consortium of the biggest cable companies, when they come up with some new technology, that will, by virtue of the fact of who developed it, be the standard for the industry. They could keep it to themselves. They could license it at exorbitant fees. They could act in all sorts of anti-competitive ways. None of that has been addressed.
Well, if this deal were to be approved, what do you see as the long-term impact?
Well, I think Professor Wu from Columbia said it best at the hearing when he said, we're moving back to, if not a monopoly, a duopoly. The only difference is, back in the old monopoly days, at least we had some semblance of regulation. We have none of that now. You basically have an unregulated duopoly in some cases, and for many consumers, hardly any choice at all with no regulation to help them.
In your opinion, what are the chances of it receiving approval?
Unfortunately, the way antitrust law has been going in the past few years, they're pretty good. Sure, the regulators will try and come up with some conditions, but conditions basically are meaningless. As we've seen in a previous Comcast deal, when they merged with NBC, there's a little bitty issue of where Bloomberg should be on the cable dial. And they've been hassling over this with lawyers for a year and a half at the FCC. The difference between this and the AT&T T-Mobile takeover is that in the AT&T case, it was a strict horizontal merger, one company trying to buy out a competitor. And that's pretty standard antitrust law. But the past few years have whittled away antitrust so that if you have a situation now where you have one big company basically doing business with another one and agree not to compete, we'll have to see how much the law will really stand up. And frankly, I'm a pessimist on this one.
And on that same note, Rick Rule, who was the lead attorney for Microsoft in the DOJ's antitrust case against it, spoke out and indicated that he believed the deal would go through. So how significant do you think this statement is?
Well, I actually covered Mr. Rule when he was the antitrust assistant attorney general. And he used to threaten a lot of things, but not follow through. In addition, he's also done some work for the phone company. So I'm not sure, why he was there. His is one opinion, but there are many others.
Okay, and in terms of timing, what do you think will happen next?
Well, next the processes will crunch through. I mean, the Department of Justice is doing its own investigation. That's pretty much of a black box. They don't have a public timetable. They don't have a public proceeding. The Federal Communications Commission has asked for more information from the parties. Just yesterday in the public part of the case, the reply comments were submitted. So we'll see how much more information the FCC wants and see how their deliberations go over the next couple of months.
All right, time will tell. All right, thank you so much for talking with us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure, Abby, anytime.
And keep watching WebProNews for the very latest on these proceedings. I'm Abby Johnson with this report.